Howdy, this is Global Entrepreneurship Week, Fort Worth 2021. My name is Joseph Horn. I am the host of this program, and we welcome you. And also we want to express some appreciation to the staff of Global Entrepreneurship Week, Fort Worth, who worked so hard to make this program happen, as well as our sponsors. We have an exciting program today. We have with us three distinguished individuals who are related to, involved highly in the architectural movement. On left, we have Jonathan Kraatz. Jonathan, good morning.
Good morning.
Jonathan is head of the Texas chapter or office of the U.S. Green Building Council. He is involved in helping to promote sustainable building, and it's very interesting. And when looking at that, your bio, you said you want to help change the world, at least buildings where we live, learn, work, and play. I find that interesting, and because I find similar remarks from Michael and Dean, Jorge, all of y'all have these sort of goals and aspirations. So we're going to go into more about that. Dean Jorge Vanegas from Texas A&M University Law School. Good morning.
Well, no, architecture.
Architecture. I'm sorry. What did I say? Apologies. And we have Michael Bennett of Bennett Partners, distinguished architecture as well, who has been involved in construction and design of buildings in Europe, New York, and you lived abroad in New York for, I was in Europe for over a dozen years.
Well, as a Texan, New York is also abroad.
That's a foreign country as well. That counts. And you've also been involved in this architecture here in Fort Worth, such as the Frost Building, other different structures, from parks, from hotels, and we're very privileged to have you involved. I know here today, I know you have staff on board in your company as well, or firm, who've done work with Disney, MGM Grand Studios, Luxor, and other events and places, as well as for George Lucas of Star Wars fame. So you have a prominent firm, and we're privileged to have you here as well. First, I'd like to talk with some of the things that are important to entrepreneurs and innovators who come to this program. And what they're looking for is what's going to be the next big thing. And we look back in our society, we've seen things that have been disrupted, how we communicate, sometimes how we shop. When will be the next disruption, or what do you see it happening in the building area? Because we construct buildings sort of the same way we have the past 100 years, and we're approaching an age of transportation as a service, the Internet of Things, but we're still building neighborhoods, homes, buildings, sort of the same way we've done a long time. We have, as I'm sure Jonathan would point out, new standards that are pushed by the U.S. Green Building Standards, the LEED, and those standards have done very well in raising the bar. There are only 4,000, as I understand, LEED Platinum buildings, and I may be wrong, but you can certainly correct me, in the United States. So while that's been a great progress, we still have a lot more way to go. And will someone come along and completely disrupt the building or construction industry, or are you all already doing it? Jonathan, let me start with you.
Sure. There are definitely disruptors within the construction and the design and construction industry. You mentioned LEED. That is one of a number of standards that are out there that are pushing the envelope for above code construction. You mentioned the number of LEED Platinum certifications. That is our highest level of certification. There are hundreds of thousands at the lower levels from there as well, though. And that Platinum designation was created for roughly the top 1% of the certification process. But within that, really what the challenges that we're facing transcend one rating system, transcend one method, and looking at what that big disruptor is right now, I would say that's going to be decarbonization and how that is accomplished across the building industry, from materials to operation methods to construction methods, that those are where the big challenges really lie from my perspective.
Thank you. And Michael, if I could turn to you very quickly, you've been involved in doing a lot of new design architecture, work for state parks in Texas, but you've also worked on the Sundance Square. You've worked on other prominent buildings and places here in Fort Worth, including TCU campus. How do you revolutionize existing structures? If we're gonna, at some point, the innovation and need to convert our buildings and become more self-sustaining and green, how are we going to go ahead and make all those conversions? Is that possible, or do we have to tear things down and start from scratch, if we really want to do that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Joseph. And I think it depends on the existing building, and it depends on the use that you're trying to put into that building. But I am of the opinion that I saw a statistic a few weeks ago that something like 50% of all the buildings we'll need by 2050 are already in existence, which means we're going to be building fewer new buildings if that is in fact true. And I think that it probably is, but I think there are challenges to retrofitting buildings. We just retrofitted a 1920s office building into a hotel. And of course, the floor loads don't necessarily match out with that. And so there's a lot of specifics that you get into with that. You oftentimes hear people talking about the idea of converting parking garages because they think that our transportation, and I believe this is true to some degree, that our transportation methods will change and we won't need as many cars. The challenge there is the floor loading for a parking garage, and the ceiling heights and all those things aren't very transferable to other building types. And so you see very few of those being built. So what we try to do is encourage people to build as few parking spaces as they possibly can, because I do believe that that's going to be a change that we see in the future. And I do wish that we could be more robust, especially here in Fort Worth, with our public transportation approach, because I think that it has to be a robust system to really start replacing what people can do with their own private car. But yeah, I do see more conversion of buildings, and I think that's a good thing. The most sustainable building is oftentimes the one that already exists, and it also does a lot to maintain the character of a place. We just worked on the horse and mule barns in the stockyards, and managed to adaptively reuse those barns into a mixed use of restaurants, retail, and creative office space. And so to me, that doing those kind of things is kind of a twofer, because you keep a historic building, and you also don't waste the energy and the effort to build a new one.
Thank you very much. And you mentioned about transportation or parking. It's very interesting. I've read some believe that when the transportation as a service industry kicks in, or revolution, you might say, kicks into our society, which could be anywhere from 3 to 5 years from now, people may not even own a car anymore. They just pull up an app on a phone and an electric car drives up by itself. And if that happens, then we have a lot of extra urban space that comes up, because all of a sudden we don't need all of those garages. We don't need all those parking spaces. And that in itself will be revolutionary in terms of how we live, work, and play, as Jonathan mentioned. Dr. Vanegas, thank you again for being here with us. It's amazing what you are overseeing. You have 173 faculty members with diverse disciplines. You have 3,200 undergraduates, graduate students. You have a full scope of all different types of programs, from construction science, landscape architecture, urban planning, Center for Heritage Conservation, health system design, leadership and management for design and construction agency, hazard reduction and recovery center, Institute for Sustainable Communities you're a member of. It's very impressive. You've got a huge portfolio there. from an academic perspective, but I think and also from obviously a practical perspective in what you're doing, we've moved from 100 years ago where we could go in a Sears catalog and order a house, and then it would come and be assembled in our lot. And I don't know why we don't do that today. That seems like a good idea. And we moved to today, where we're building, instead of net zero buildings and neighborhoods, we're building regular homes. What do you see as the future and opportunities for entrepreneurs and innovation?
I'm going to be very frank and blunt, and that is my style. I have been with this industry a lot. I have seen this industry through the eyes of an architect, which I am. I studied in civil engineering and construction engineering, so I see it through the eyes of engineering and through the eyes of construction. I have worked with owners all the way from the Business Roundtable in the early 80s to now, Construction Industry Institute, Construction Users Roundtable, a lot of organizations. And what I can say has kept the industry from really leaping forward is the fractioning by discipline, by domain, by knowledge, with very little cohesive integration that capitalizes and leverages on the synergies that everybody brings to the table. I was at the forefront of seeing the birth of sustainable development in the early 90s, barely after the Brundtland Commission. And I have seen that. But we continue doing the same thing. And I'll tell you what the one single thing is. The world cannot exist if you take away the planners, the architects, the landscape architects, the developers, the constructors, and the subset of those industries that then maintain and operate those facilities until the end of the service life. It's not a life cycle. The life cycle only starts when you're applying the real big disruptors, in my opinion, which are the circular economy. The day that we don't look at facilities and then wonder what are we going to do with them when they are old? Are we going to retrofit them? They were never designed to be retrofitted. They were never designed to be adaptive reuse. They were never designed like that. That's why it's so expensive. But when you have a circular economy, which is not something new, this has been taught from the beginning of the sustainability movement. Different words, different semantics. So if you were able to an entrepreneurial venture that connects the dots in a seamless way, and technology is moving more and more towards that. Forget about the Sears catalog. You're going to be in your house. You're going to be on your computer. You're going to pull up a library of housing designs. You're going to be customizing the same way that you customize a computer. You customize it and then you send it. It will be 3D printed. It will be automatically laid out to make sure it complies with all the codes. We have faculty doing that, autonomous code checking. It's immersive reality, so you can actually walk through the house, see everything. You can strip it and see the BIM connectivity of everything. The problem with the industry is its lack of connectivity, and it's not the silos. It's that we have not invested entrepreneurially or corporate or strategically in the connectivity of those silos. So using the analogy of design, I believe that silos are necessary. You're not going to make a constructor out of every architect, and you're not going to make a planner into a landscape designer. You cannot do that. So let's accept the fact that we live in a world of silos. The entrepreneurs are going to create the windows that allow one silo to look at what the other one is doing. The doors that will allow them to kind of navigate among the silos. The stairways that provide career ladders within a silo and across silos. The bridges that connect the C-suite with a middle ground to the workforce at the bottom. And the last, the tunnels that in today's world, to use the analogy of the dark web, that allow people to connect without other people knowing. And not in a nefarious or unethical way, but the fact of the matter is to overcome the stereotypes of what architects are, or what constructors are, or what all those are. And the punchline is very simple. It's $1 trillion industry, right? How is that measured? By how much construction projects are. You know, the fees of architects, the designs, you build them and everything. That's what goes into that $1 trillion. So my question is, what do those $1 trillion enable in terms of economic growth? They represent a lot more. An architect can design a hospital. How much does that hospital represent in terms of revenues, in terms of salaries, in terms of return on investments? The industry doesn't capitalize on that. So you want another disruptor? It's when Google decides to do housing. You want another disruptor? It's when Amazon decides to be the next one. You're seeing it already with a Boring Company in tunnels. So the point I'm trying to make is we need to get out of the traditional silo mentality into the combination of the whole ecosystem that we represent. And that's what entrepreneurship does. And that's the end of my speech.
Thank you very much.
If I can add something onto that, Joseph, I think in terms of disruptors, one thing that I feel strongly needs to be disrupted in where we are today is the sort of mindless replication of tract housing, creating these sprawling, expansive suburbs at the edges of our city, when we have plenty of available land within the loop, usually of most of our larger cities. Because every one of those tract homes that gets built, and it happens because it's the intersection between affordability and construction. And so it's easy for some guy to come in and buy X hundred acres and plat and build a whole bunch of really cheap houses, that it costs our cities a lot of money to extend utilities to that house, to extend roads to that house, to provide fire protection, to provide schools. There's a lot, those houses don't pay for themselves. And then they begin a long spiral of deterioration because they're poorly built. And so that is, to me, the least sustainable thing I see happening that needs to be disrupted. When I was a kid driving west of Fort Worth, I used to see these beautiful rolling hills that made me know this was where the West began. And it felt like, you know, I felt a connection to that place. Today, when I do that, I see a sea of gray charcoal composition roof shingles that have covered prairie, that have covered land that we will never be able to get back. And so if we could find some way to disrupt that, I think that would be the most powerful thing our generation could leave for the next one.
That's a very interesting and important point, because a lot of the land that I see being taken over by developers is oftentimes beautiful land, and it's sometimes the best land that ends up being covered over with concrete and really natural habitats destroyed, as opposed to land that does not have as much value. Of course, all land has some value because, and it is important because that all contributes to soil degradation, runoff, and more carbon is put into the atmosphere. I think 12 times more carbon is put in the atmosphere than from the burning of fossil fuels, simply from the soil degradation and desertification that occurs. And Dean, or Dr. Vanegas, you mentioned earlier about the silos. I'd love to hear you talk about that, because that's part of what the Ecoplex is attempting to overcome. The idea of trying to collaborate, bring all those disparate interests together, because naturally we do operate in silos. And we hope by establishing an anchor and creating this project as a way to attract architects, designers, planners from maybe all over the world to come together and bring the best minds to create something that raises and creates a new standard on which we can live and construct. And it sounds like a lot of challenges there we can face. Jonathan, how do you respond to what you've heard? And given it to the U.S. Green Building Council, what are they doing to, and I assume they're doing some things to try to overcome some of these silos as well? But it's challenging, I imagine.
Well, there are those challenges that exist everywhere in that sense. As far as the approach from U.S. Green Building Council, the LEED rating system from the very beginning has originally focused on an integrated process, trying to bring everybody to the table from the beginning of a project. That has evolved into an integrative process. I know it's semantics, changing a couple letters, but really the words change, the concepts really don't. But to bring everybody, have all the different specialties working together, because sometimes a small change in one area can mean a huge change in another. And that really happens, especially when you're looking at material sizing, mechanical, air conditioning, heating, cooling systems. Small changes to the exterior of a building can greatly affect the heating and cooling loads within a building. And that is just one very obvious example. But I think that, and we did talk about a little bit looking at community scale too, where outside of a single building, trying to have communities working across those silos. I'm working with a city in Texas right now on a full city evaluation and getting the public works department to talk to the waste department, to talk to the water department, to talk to the city manager, and also to health and safety offices has been eye-opening for them that, oh, these things other people do impact my work. So it is definitely one of the huge things that we're trying to work on. Do I have a great solution for that I can hand you right now? No, I don't. But I do think that is, I do agree with Dean Vanegas that it is a definite key to unlocking things.
And I agree, and I applaud that. I do think it is a practical issue. If you're, as Dr. Vanegas mentioned, if you're a construction person, you're used to constructing in one way, and you have an architect or someone who has radical new ways of constructing that involves hempcrete, involves using solar panel glasses for windows, things that are not part of that knowledge base. You run into problems because everybody's got to be on the same page. And does there need to be some sort of cross section? How do you transform the construction industry? How do you transform building when you do have those disparate silos that do operate differently and they're almost independent of each other?
I mentioned something, Joseph, am I interrupting? No, I just want to mention something. Part of the challenge that I have seen is that, going back to my concept of who actually benefits from the value of what we do, and you're talking about entrepreneurship, I can tell you that the biggest niche in entrepreneurship that I can see is in actually not only providing that connectivity among the silos, but actually disrupting what has been the bread and butter of the construction industry. Like you say, it's not just 100 years, it's millennia. Okay, there are pictures of construction structures that are done the same way that we do them today, using masonry and rocks and timber and all of that. So let's just face it. But if you have an entrepreneur, let me just give you a real scenario. Here's an entrepreneur that is doing work in nanomaterials. Okay, well, they don't teach that in architecture school. They don't teach that in construction. They don't teach that anywhere. Those people are doing material science. And they discover some kind of molecule that will make concrete 50 times more resistant to rust. Or it can make drywall 100 times more resistant to fire. You can change the dynamic of thermal loading of HVAC by just doing it, correct? We don't have that. That's not how the industry operates. R&D is not an integral part of a company because they are too focused on the bottom line, keeping the payroll, keeping the company going. Who's going to pay for the R&D? And that's part of the challenge that I see. So if you look at what we all do, whether it's an architect or a constructor, they focus on trying to get the efficiency to the max of the process. At the same time, they try to maximize the effectiveness of the product. All right? So the process of building a hospital, let's get the lowest cost. Correct? And then it should work. But the real value of a hospital is not brick and mortar. It's what they enable in terms of health, prevention care, and everything. We don't get to choose how much of that comes to us. So when you are able to take away just the ROI based on lowering CapEx, capital expenditures, and lowering OpEx, operating expenditures, so that whoever is the investor of a project, which is a product, hey, I'm returning my money. There's another ROI that I think is going to be the biggest disruptor of the industry as well, and that is a return on impact. You know, affordable housing is not being able to sell a house for $20,000. There are houses of $20,000 all over the place. It's what they enable in solving the problem of homelessness. It's solving the problem, how much does a FEMA trailer cost? Something that disintegrates after a few years, right? But if for the same price, I have a house that will withstand a hurricane, that will withstand a forest fire, that will be energy efficient with zero emission. We just had a competition of zero emission 3D printing homes. So we're talking about changing the narrative of what our industry is, from producing buildings and roads and hospitals and houses to what we enable. And that's where I come in with my own personal pitch. It's about the quality of life we provide for everyone, everywhere. It's about the quality of the place that we enable, whether it's in the built, natural, or virtual environment. And it's how we facilitate, enhance, strengthen what people do in a place, and that is human endeavor. Whether it's verb of healing or praying or buying or whatever, that's what we enable, and that's why we should get a piece of that return, both of impact and of economic return.
Thank you. Important points. I appreciate that. Michael, I noticed on your LinkedIn, you say Michael is heavily involved in this community and believes passionately in the power of architecture and design to build a better world. And I love that, to build a better world. That's all of you all have that passion, and I can see that in what you say and how you talk. You've heard Jorge and Jonathan talk about the silos, about the challenges that we face. Jorge brought up the return on impact. How do you see things going on? I do wonder, like Jorge mentioned, that is it going to be some kid out of Harvard with a laptop who creates some way that's going to revolutionize the architectural industry, just as Apple has revolutionized information technology. Elon Musk has revolutionized batteries, rocketry, electric cars. All these individuals, Uber was invented as something that nobody thought would get anywhere. And these things that have been incredibly disruptive. You mentioned about disruption with regard to nature, how we construct there. What do you think about how we return on impact? How would we do that?
Well, it's particularly, I think, difficult, as Dr. Vanegas was saying, in our industry, because it is so splintered in so many ways. And it was interesting listening to your discussion about the silos, because it made me think sort of about what I see happening when we're working on a project. Yeah, there are silos of ourselves, the architects. There's the silo of the mechanical engineers. There's the silo of the structural engineer. Our buildings are always better, and they do what they do more efficiently if we collaborate with those guys. And I tend to think of it as collaboration and not necessarily working in silos, but it's more effective when we work that way. And I'll pick on my friends, the traffic engineers. You know, that's a profession that doesn't necessarily have to collaborate with anyone very often. And I think the system of roads we build in our state is not very functional. And in many ways, those guys are the most powerful city planners we have. And if there was some collaboration between the guy that's building the road and everybody else, I think we'd end up with better roads. And I totally agree that collaboration effort is important, but it's difficult oftentimes in our profession with those disruptors, because Sometimes you end up with a client that doesn't want to pay for that cutting edge technology. He doesn't want to take the risk of that cutting edge technology. You end up with the engineer where you say, hey, we can do this or that. We had a thing recently on a particular structural technology where the engineer said, look, I don't want to risk my liability doing that because nobody's done it before. And so I do think we have to make the we have to make the canvas more accessible to everybody to take some risk. And you know, I think somebody like Google, they did what they did, and it was something that could grow very small and get very large because it was a great idea. I think that's that kind of level playing field for a risk taker is where we need to get, because the industry is very entrenched in what it does. The codes are designed around that. The banks lend money around what is established and what can be expected. And so I think we have to make that work, there has to be something that really dramatically disrupts the system. I don't know what that is right now. I wish I did, and I would be, you know, in Mark Zuckerberg's position someday. But for us, getting back to what you were saying, and that's a good segue. For us in our firm, what gets us up in the morning is not to make a project that makes us the most money. We are really interested in the projects that contribute to our city. You'll note that on my own biography, I spent 20 years flying around as a hired gun, going to places and doing things and flying back. Well, there's nothing less sustainable than a job site that's 900 miles away. And so we've really concentrated our practice on working locally. That lets us really get into the local community, to understand that nonprofit that needs some help, to understand that young and upcoming entrepreneur developer. I had two in my office yesterday that we were brainstorming about how they could make a project work. And for us and for our firm, what gets us up is the idea that we can make a difference. And I'll pick on my friends, the accountants. I would have a hard time thinking that if I balanced the books, I really made a big difference. But we just finished the redesign of a men's shelter for Presbyterian Night Shelter. And what we tried to do there was add dignity to something that was otherwise, I mean, it's a warehouse building. It's a metal warehouse building. Our guys did everything they could to bring dignity and grace to something that was a metal warehouse building where people have to live. And so those are the kind of things that get us up in the morning. And I think, yeah, you're right. It sounds Pollyannish, but I get up every day thinking that I have a chance to change the world a little bit at a time.
I appreciate very much what you're saying.
Can I give a 2 thumbs up to Michael? I have to tell you, that speaks my language, and my frustration is when you look at, actually a very good way of looking at it is that when you focus on architecture as just the world of design, which is something that frustrates me, instead of designing the world we want, I think that you just hit it in the head. You're putting people first. And I think that I applaud you on that one. I have to say that very openly, Michael.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I don't say it to get that.
No, but that's why I volunteer
it. But there's no better feeling than seeing your work make people's lives better.
Well, that is wonderful to hear. It is challenging, I assume, in the business world to do that. The Business Roundtable indicated in 2019 that they want to shift, moving from evaluating a company based on profits to other impactful things in our society. That's a nice to say. Is it really happening? I don't know. And
it's hard to measure. It's a hard thing to measure.
It's a hard thing to measure. And as Jorge mentioned too, if you build a hospital, people think, well, we want to build it as cheap as possible. And you're right. Are you building it in a way that really is impactful in terms of the patients, in terms of positivity for the mental health of not only the patients, but the workers there? 19.1% of Americans I hear are taking medication for mental health this past year. 1 out of 4 individuals have a diagnosable mental health condition. How we work, how we can make, I would say, how we can make our workspaces and the home spaces more livable, more peaceful, more enjoyable, benefits us individually, but it also benefits productivity. It also benefits our economy and social networks. But yeah, as you, gentlemen, as you expressed, how do you measure that? Jonathan, I see you wanted to say something.
Really, that is one of the challenges we're trying to address right now, is how do you quantify that social impact? How do you quantify, really has spawned a whole different industry for environmental social governance measurement. And you're talking about corporate evaluation on that. Yes, that's absolutely true. And it is happening. There's a developer here from Texas who went to Wall Street for financing, and they were asked, where's your social and governance plan? And they came back and said, what's that? They said, we'll figure it out, and then we might give you money. This is a company with a long history, of success, but that is looking at that social impact of not just individual projects, but corporations as a whole, and not just in a single location, is really one of those pieces that is very important moving forward. I will admit I don't fully understand the calculations on that. There are much smarter people than I who are doing that, but being able to, as Dr. Vanegas said, how do you quantify the impact of a hospital? It's not in how much it costs versus how much they're billing. What is the impact to the health of the community? What is the impact to the preventable things that are not happening because of that hospital or other entity? So really that is.
And let's turn quickly, thank you, Jonathan, quickly to another brief topic. The Ecoplex back in 2019 talked about the need to prepare for a pandemic. Of course, the following year we got one, obviously. Should we be thinking about ways of changing our workspaces, airflow systems, other things to reduce the spread of super germs and viruses? And we also talked about the vulnerability of a grid to a Carrington event or other disruption at geomagnetic level that affects electrical systems. Should we be thinking about some way of making our electrical systems within the buildings more resilient to these types of threats? Are we giving any thought to these sorts of things? Anyone on that?
Well,
I know that's out of left field.
Well, I'll jump in from my own point of view and say, as far as the building systems, in my view, that's something we should have done a long time ago, that we should have already been thinking about people's health inside our buildings, because our buildings should not make people sick. That's and everybody's nodding because both you guys, I know the Green Building Council certainly looks at the world that way.
Yes.
And so that's certainly something that we look at. You run in oftentimes again to the issue of economics. If I'm building an office building and it costs me, the mechanical system costs 10% more because I'm doing these things, and if it costs X% more because I'm bringing in 100% outside air instead of recycling the air, you know, those things all cost money. But I do think we're getting to a point where the user, the guy that's sitting in an office, wants to know that he's safe, and I think the guy that rents the space wants to be sure that the people he's bringing into the office are going to be safe. And so I do think there'll be more attention paid to that. And we're retrofitting buildings in our newer buildings where we're working with owners to talk about the options of what they can do. So I especially see that on the HVAC side. On the electrical side, the grid side of things, you know, again, I think that's one of those things that within the buildings that we do, I don't see the issue there. I see that being really exterior to the buildings and more a system-wide issue. But I think it gets to improving our infrastructure, difficult to do when it's been privatized because again of the money issue that we mentioned before. But that's sort of my 2 cents on it. The other thing that I think is important, going back to the buildings for a second, is to give people the option of getting outside. I mean, we have so inured ourselves to a completely hermetically sealed environment that we don't give people the opportunity sometimes to open the door and walk out on a terrace or open a window. And a lot of our work is really about the idea of inside and outside, and giving people the ability to be in both places. Because yeah, it gets hot here in Texas a few months out of the year, but if you think about where you put that terrace, so maybe it's on the east side, not on the southwest side, and if you think of those things, you can make places for people to be outside that are not uncomfortable. And, you know, that hopefully fresh air is the best thing that they could, hopefully we have fresh air that could be something for them that's healthy.
Absolutely. And for us, as you said, is something the Green Building Council focuses on. Our strategic plan has 4 key areas. One is sustainable development. The second is resilience, which gets into the infrastructure and the grid and transportation. Health and wellness is another component of that, and not just within a building, but community-wide. And the fourth of that is equity. And how do we help accomplish those other 3 while in an equitable manner? So it's not just the top 1%. You mentioned LEED Platinum buildings. Not everyone's going to have the LEED Platinum building. I don't work in one. I don't live in one. I can't do that at this time. But I think that there are definitely things that we can continue to do across the entire spectrum that will have benefits, especially in health. We're trying to work on some things right now with air quality in our school systems and trying to get at minimum testing of the air in our schools to see where it's at and what updates need to happen. And I think those are challenges that aren't just the Green Building Council. Those are education challenges. They're societal challenges that everybody is needing to be involved with. I know that there are big concepts out there, so there's also big opportunities.
What's interesting about the health we mentioned, Jonathan, just going a side tangent, I've heard that, well, I know there are a lot of very wealthy people who are building so-called net zero houses.
Mm-hmm.
The challenge is most Americans never get to see them. They're not their friends. They don't get called over to have a cup of tea with them. And so the world doesn't know. Most of Americans don't know. Most construction managers don't know. Most designers don't know. And the Ecoplex, if we could have a small example of what a new age, a futuristic house would look like, do you think that that would inspire and help accelerate this transformation? That showcase it, in other words.
Well, a very sustainable house doesn't look any different than the house down the street from you. And you're right, there are people don't know what's going on. There are, just using the LEED rating system and the single family home version of the LEED rating system, there are more than 15,000 certified homes in the state of Texas. They look exactly like a house you would expect. Some of them are in that expanse and sprawl that Michael mentioned earlier. But it doesn't, a sustainable house doesn't necessarily look any different. It has to do with the materials, it has to do with the systems, it has to do with minor design tweaks in many cases, some of which don't cost anything if you actually think about them and design them in at the beginning, how you orient the house, and those type of things. So yes, having examples is a great idea for people to see, and then opening up high level sustainable homes, some of which we did an event with one pre-COVID. I don't remember how long ago that was anymore. That it was a retrofit of an existing property that was taken from a 1960s standard construction to, you mentioned it is LEED Platinum now, but it's a huge renovation and a huge undertaking to do that. And it was built as a demonstration piece. So just to prove as a proof of concept. But yes, definitely having people be able to see even minor things that they can do to improve their own situation is a great idea.
One last thing before we wrap up, what do you, if there's one thing you could tell entrepreneurs and innovators who are watching this program, what would you tell them? And I know Dr. Vanegas, or say Jorge, I know you've already mentioned some of those already. And it's interesting when you mentioned about the nano robots. It's interesting you say that. I kind of wonder sometimes if you get on an app, you have a truckload of nanobots that are dropped on the lot. You hit an app, hit upload your design, and next thing you know, whoa, you have a house. And that sounds humorous, but who knows, 100 years ago, if you're telling people the technology we have today, they wouldn't believe it. We have BNSF doing electric trains. We have linear lab, digital, Sinclair Digital doing things that could be pioneering transformation in our society, TaaS, information, Internet of Things. We have a lot of disruption going on. What other things do you see for innovators? One last things.
Well, from my point of view, I would just say you still got to do your homework. You might have a brilliant idea and it may seem like it came in a spark, but usually that may follow years of research to get you there. And then I think you have to be flexible, in our world today, even more than any other. Being flexible and being able and willing to adapt and change is going to be important to anything. So you may have a great idea, but how does that idea adapt and change until it becomes something that's marketable and impactful?
We'll complement that by saying the following, and one of the things I teach is creativity and innovation and design thinking and entrepreneurial thinking, but I have added digital thinking into the whole world of where we are. So if there was one place where I would tell entrepreneurs to start looking, it would be like, don't try to reinvent the wheel without asking first if you need a wheel in the first place. I think that what we have in construction is too many things that are embedded in how we do things that lead to a very low productivity. If you were able to increase the productivity of the construction industry, just increasing it, you could increase it by 1.something trillion. That's almost as much as what the industry expends, which tells you that we're wasting a lot of money.
Yeah, it's a very wasteful process.
What Michael said is completely correct. We are not a proactive, innovative, forward-thinking, leapfrogging kind of industry. So if I'm an entrepreneur and I have a chance to inspire entrepreneurs, and that's what we're trying to do here in our ecosystem of entrepreneurship at Texas A&M, that's what I would do. Look where nobody else is looking and think disruption, not just continuous improvement.
Amen.
Hey, Jonathan.
Well said.
That's very well said. I totally agree with that. And I really have nothing to add on that. I think that's really the.
No, I
was
think
hoping to go before him because I knew that was going to happen. But I think that, no, really, and keeping an open mind and not knowing, because you don't know where that idea is coming from, that you don't know what's going to spark that next thought that will be the disruptor. And it could come from an industry you don't expect that it will. If it's digital, if it's materials, that there are great opportunities within that to move things in directions that we really don't know that are out there yet.
I think one of the greatest teachers I had in my life is not Mahatma Gandhi or one of those. It was a 2-year-old that kept saying why, and his kids goes to that stage. And I remember living in England, and in England, most all the faucets for everything is 100, 200, 300, 400 years old. Separate faucet for hot water, separate for cold water. And so you either burn your hands or scald them, because in those days they would fill up the base, and nobody does that anymore. And then I walked into a brand new hotel in London, shiny doors, glass, automatic, everything. I go into the restroom thinking, wow, finally a modern restroom. Wouldn't you know? In the faucet, they had a separate one for hot water and a separate faucet for cold water. Why? Because that's the way they have always been doing it. And I love to hear what you are talking about, because you all are, in a sense, disruptors, because you are thinking in terms of impact. You're thinking about, listen, we do need a question. Can we do it better? Can we not just focus on money? Can we focus on other things that are important, that deliver a long-term benefit to not only our society, but also to the company and to our clients and to their employees? and consider the long-term impact, as Michael referenced to the taxes and the utilities that impact. There are many things in the long term that impact how we build, how we think, how we work, how we play, that we don't really consider. And so we, of course, applaud the innovators who challenge the way we think and our complacency. And thank you, gentlemen, for being involved with Global Entrepreneurship Week at Fort Worth 2021. It's been an excellent presentation. I've certainly learned a lot. It's been exciting and wonderful for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Joseph, for putting this together. And just don't forget what Henry Ford said. If you always do what you've always done, you always get what you've always got.
That's right.
So many years ago. Let's move forward. It's a pleasure to meet you, Michael. It's a pleasure to meet you, Jonathan. And thank you, Joseph, for making this happen.
Thank you, gentlemen. Have a wonderful day. Keep safe and keep well.
Thank you, guys. Enjoyed it. See you.